Yeah, we're live. I'm late, a couple hours. No, it's a couple hours between friends, but I am here tonight. We're going to talk about the dyno results, the video that I posted today of the the oil test on the LS motor. And what I want to find out is, what did you guys think? Did it turn out the way that you thought? I mean, did the results work the way that you would expect oil to perform? Most importantly, so we did two tests for those guys that are not familiar, that are maybe watching this video for the first time. What we did, you can take a look at the video, it's up right now, but I did a comparison between basically 5W30 conventional oil, the cheap stuff that I normally get when I go to the auto parts store. And the reason that I get that oil, not because I don't think that synthetic oil isn't better, it is better, obviously. So if you have that choice, definitely get that. But I opt for the whatever's on sale oil at the auto parts store, mostly because it's convenient, but really because the motors that I get from the wrecking yard, we don't know what kind of shape that they're in, and they may not really deserve good oil yet. This L33 is at a point now where it deserves good oil. It's proven itself. It says, hey, look, I'm not only am I doing well and running good enough to be considered an actual motor, but I'm surpassing that. I'm doing very, very well. So now it does deserve that. It does deserve an upgrade to synthetic oil. But I always start off with whatever's the cheapest thing, whatever is the $20 or $22 or $23 version of oil. If it says oil on the thing that I'm in, and I figure that the junkyard motor, whatever would have come out of there has got to be way worse. So a new oil and filter go a long way. And actually, like on this motor, it's had a few oil changes now. And the more that I flush that out, I think that the better the motor gets. It's contaminated with stuff. When I drain the oil, it's bad. I know that when I eventually take the oil pan off, if I have to put a fitting in there, I might do it in the front cover. But I think I may have already done that because we've already run a turbo on this. But I know that in the pan, there's going to be stuff in the pan because there's parts that have dropped off of here, carbon deposits and things like that, so that are in there and caked up oil. So it's a junkyard motor, and we saw that when I took the valve covers off, when we've done cam swaps and things on it, you can see that with the front cover off. So that we expect that, but the more oil that we get, good oil that we get going through there, because it might be a lot of these truck motors, they don't get like regular maintenance. I'm pretty good about changing the oil in my truck, only because the oil pressure seems to get lower as the oil gets worse and worse. And then when I freshen it up, the oil pressure comes back. And I'm not talking just about temperature. I'm talking about like because I have a lot of time behind the wheel when I'm driving back and forth to West Tech, and when I drove out to Ohio, another perfect example. But you get to know what your oil pressure is at a sustained 2,000 RPM, let's say on the freeway. You're like, look, this is the same. I've been doing this for an hour and a half straight and not moved at all in terms of RPM. I know what the oil pressure is. The temperature has already stabilized during this cruise. All of that's happening, and I know where it is. And if it changes, then I know that, hey, something has gone wrong or it's going wrong. And after the thing has about 3,000 or 4,000 miles on it, if I let it go beyond that, the oil pressure starts getting lower. It starts getting lower at idle. It starts getting lower under cruise. And then when I change it, in fact, it's getting low enough to where oftentimes I'll put instead of a 5W30, I'll put a 1030 in it. And that seems to help a little bit. I don't race the thing around. I'm never really at high RPM in the thing. So I'm more concerned that it has good idle oil pressure than I am about it. It has plenty of oil pressure when we're at RPM, assuming that the factory gauge is accurate. But in the test, we ran this cheap 5W30 non-synthetic oil. This particular stuff was STP, I think is what the stuff that was on sale. And we compared it to a Lucas 5W30 synthetic oil. We've used Lucas stuff in the past a lot, and it works very, very well. There are actually a lot of good oils out there, a lot of good synthetic oils. And we've used Lucas because they had a bunch there at West Tech, but it worked out very well. And like I said, it always has in the past. It's an interesting comparison. We didn't see much of a change in power between keeping the weights the same and being synthetic and non-synthetic. It may have wiggled around a little bit, but it's in the range of repeatability of the motor. And so that test didn't show a great deal. So, we do the low buck versus the high buck stuff, and all the low buck guys jump up and down and say, yeah, low buck stuff wins. But I mean, does it really? which one would you rather have in there? Which one would last longer? Which one would give you better fuel mileage? Maybe there's a change in the frictional quality. Maybe it reduces friction. Maybe it makes the thing, I've had people tell me that they get much better mileage with, using synthetic oil. But usually when they tell me that, the single biggest thing that's going to change your fuel mileage more than any other thing that you do is the way that you drive. So I haven't seen, people don't really understand what it means to test things. I think a lot of guys don't. They don't have a feel for that. When you test mileage and you just check the mileage and go, oh yeah, I got 26.8 miles per gallon or whatever on this one, and this one, oh, I got 27.9 miles per gallon. They didn't drive it the same. They didn't drive even the same route. They didn't drive it the same during the day. The load wasn't the same in the vehicle. They weren't driving it the same. That's the biggest thing, that you can vary the fuel mileage by 5 or 6 miles per gallon just by the way that you drive, just by the speed that you drive, how much you're on and off the gas. So that's the biggest thing. So it's really hard for a person to actually be repeatable. So that, like, you'd have to go out and not just do 2 runs and do 2 back-to-back runs. That's not nearly enough to determine your fuel mileage. You have to go out without making any changes and go out and make multiple runs on the same road. Try to drive exactly the same as you can. Maybe get a stretch where you can drive 200 miles with just a cruise control set at 65 miles an hour or whatever you want your test parameter to be. Go out and do that 5 or 6 times and go, okay, look, on this one, it got 28.6. This one, I got 28.4. This one, I got 28.7 and 28.1. And then you look at all that and you go, okay, my average thing is like this. Okay, good. Now make a change and go out and run all of those again. And hopefully set the cruise control and the cars aren't cutting in front of you and all that. There are a lot of things to take, even if you could set up a situation where you're just cruising down the road, minding your own business at a steady speed, and the wind, the temperature is not different and the wind's not different. The grade's obviously not going to be different because you're going to be going on the same road. But there's a lot of stuff to consider here to determine whether or not something makes more power, whether or not something makes more or less fuel mileage. It's a real a lot goes into this kind of testing. So the next test that we did after we tested the power gain from the synthetic versus the non-synthetic is we changed the weight of the oil. And the weight of the oil really has a big effect on power. And I'm surprised that nobody else brought this up in the comments. And this is something we want to talk about. And this is why people come to the live feed, so that we can talk about weird stuff. And one of the things is that we went from a 0-10 weight, which Westech had excess of because we very rarely ever use that in anything. So it's been sitting around. And then we compared that to a 2050. And a 2050 isn't usually something, I never run it in an LS. It's way too thick, in my opinion, for an LS. And the viscosity is wrong for the LS. And one of the things that makes it wrong is if you take a look at your lifters are designed actually with the orifice and the flow of the lifter. It's designed for a certain weight oil. We saw this a lot. It made a significant change in power. We did some testing, and Mahovitz did this also on 4.6 modular motors. It was very, very, very not receptive to changes in oil weight. You would lose power from doing it. And we saw that here too. We saw going from the 0-10 weight oil to the 2050 that we saw a drop in power. We saw an increase in oil pressure. We saw a drop in power. And, I think those two things kind of go together. Maybe we're making are we just making the pump work harder? Is that where the loss is? But the other thing, the other potential thing is the lifters may not be acting properly the way that they would with the right weight oil. We see this usually more with a much thinner oil, that they wouldn't act as well, but this didn't show that. So, but it's also something to think about, that a hydraulic lifter has to be operating properly for the motor to make optimum power. Obviously, you want it to act. You want it to not deflect. You want it to not pump up and hang the valve open. You want it to do the stuff that it's supposed to do. But when we have the wrong oil in there was definitely a change in power, and we saw that in the test. So let's see. I'm going to go ahead and we'll do a quick poll, because tonight's going to be a quick. Tonight will be a quick session. do you only run the Okay, so the question for tonight for the poll is, do you only run the OEM specified oil weight in your vehicle? So, or do you do you go off menu and put something else in there? Alan, Aaron, 16V, Scirocco, Bigfoot, LB Williams, Richard deserves more subscribers. He's doing good. The subscribers are climbing every day and every month and every year, so that's all good. Best comparison is oil pressure at the different weights. Yep, $16, 15 W40 diesel oil. So at 25 to 35 main bearing clearance, what oil weight is recommended for a 402 LS? 25 to 35 would be a big difference. That would be way more variation than you would want. Noodles, yeah, it is late night. it's Cinemax late night. Best 1040 oil for high compression. I don't know what best means. There's lots and lots of good synthetic oils that are, if you're very specific about that oil weight. And AMSOIL, I've not run AMSOIL, but other people have. Royal Purple, I really like the red line stuff. That's worked really well for me in the past. The Lucas oil, we ran in all the Bonneville motors. Mobil One, all of that stuff has worked well. The Driven stuff, I think, is good stuff as well. I haven't done as much testing on that as I would like to, but I think that the Driven oil also is good. My old Quad 4 was very communicative when it was due for an oil change. Both the gauge and the timing chain noise would let me know. Yeah. Yeah, you can see it in the gauge. You definitely can see it on this truck. AMSOIL, I've been using it for 23 years now, using oil analysis and amazing results every time. So you change your oil in your streetcar and send it out for analysis? I have 90 weight break-in on my 570 horse motor. I wonder if it would be like more power with regular oil. You have 90 weight? So you have gear oil in it? Maybe it's not 90 weight. Probably not. 90 weight would be difficult to start. I know it's a single viscosity and made 90 pounds of oil pressure on the dyno. Yeah, that's still not the same thing. Pretty easy to make 90 pounds. A factory LS pump and any kind of cold 530 oil, if you run it all the way up when it's cold, like make passes after the water's warmed up, but the oil hasn't been warmed up, it'll make 90 pounds of oil pressure at 6,500. And the other thing that nobody mentioned is to make sure that we had the oil level the same on all of them, which, by the way, we did. And when I say we, I mean me. Morel hydraulic rollers recommend 1030 for my big block. That I would go by their recommendation. They should have done enough testing to understand what's going on with the flow and the orifice on the hydraulic roller lifters. 50% old engine oil, 50% turbo oil. What tuner can I get for a 5.9 Magnum engine? Do you mean who or what type of tuner can you get? Does anybody know what, like HP tuners or those kinds of things? SET, do any of those things work for 5.9 Magnum engines? Many manufacturers spec 20 weight instead of 30 weight despite no clearance spec changes. How do you know it's one over the other with no changes in clearance? But they do that based on they will change the oil viscosity to improve fuel mileage. We know that they do that. But usually when somebody specifies something light, like we've seen 020s also on some of the import stuff, and usually the bearing clearances are done adjusted accordingly. On my Torino 73 and the Sentra 87, I run synthetic oil. Force fed, what is the pump you're using? What is the what is the RPM? My guess is it's going to be a 530. Might if got 3,000s. That's going to be more than factory. Maybe a 1030. Some OEMs will have in the owner's manual which oil to use if you plan on doing track sessions. It's not the same weight that it came with from the factory. So, Aaron, you want pros and cons of high volume versus standard volume pumps? Well, as a general statement, obviously one of those flows more than the other one. But those are things that you would consider after you've done your bearing clearances. Have you ever run motorcycle oil in your car? I don't think so, but is there a big difference between motorcycle oil and car oil? My wife's Honda specified 520, and the handbook said any other weight will void the warranty. I don't really think that they can make that statement. I don't think that that's legal. We are so good at this game, bro. Why didn't you compare the power curves and oil pressure curves of the two 530 oils to the 010 oil? The peak numbers were basically the same. How do you know that I didn't? You mean, why are you asking why I didn't include it in the test? Because the test was a 010 versus a 5 versus a 2050. I was running 530, but now 540 at my LS2. I think all the LT engines are 020. A lot of the OEM stuff is going to lighter weight oils. ZDP test. What do you want me to compare it to? Like having some versus not having some? What would be practical? Bill, you need to try something in there to see. Do you know exactly what the clearances are and stuff, and what pump is in there, and what the drain back is like? On small blocks and stuff, and those conventional motors, we normally would run a 1030 or a 1040. John, can you do a quick recap of the results? I got 2 barrels of 020 Castrol Edge for cheap and ran it and everything. Saw 35 to 40 psi hot, and I was skeptical at first because I thought it'd be too thin. Are you seeing that at idle? Is there power to be gained from running a standard pump instead of a high volume pump? Yeah, Wes, the Engine Masters guys have an oil pump test up on their wherever their channel is. They ran a bunch of them. I ran 1030 in the crankcase trans for my 70s 50cc moped. Drove it slow. Stock oil was 530. So I drained it and put in 020, and the clutch nut spun off. The clutch nut, I don't think is going to be related to oil. I've detonated rings and pieces of my bearings still look good with a cheap 2050 tractor oil. Plug gap on a small block on a GT45 is going to be 28 to 30 thousandths. I've seen the oil spec versus a clearance. The same in Honda V6, but don't have them handy anymore. It was years ago. Hunter, thank you very much. Let's see what your question is. Whatever happened to the big 455? I still have it. You said you're going to put aluminum intake and camshafts along with other supporting mods to gain some boost horsepower, but I never saw follow-up. It's not back together yet. That's why. Idle pressure was 35 to 40. Is that a new motor? That seems fairly high for a 020. Bill, I put a 1030 in it, at least. Maybe a 1040. I think there's additives in the motorcycle oil for wet clutches. Okay, that would make sense. Bill, you're in Modesto. So how's our poll doing? Do you only run the OEM specified oil weight in your vehicle? 60% are saying no. You got a bunch of rebels going on. So Motul oil, there's no substitute. There's nothing better than that. Nothing else to even consider. Thinking about doing a 455 build, and your videos really helped me. Can't wait to hopefully see it again. I am too. That motor is the goal for that motor is to put it back together as a replica of a 1970 stage 1 deal. So I want it to be the right compression and cylinder head and that stuff so that I can run that and hopefully compare it to, I have this L78 396, which is not a good comparison for that 455, but an LS6 that I have going together as a 454 is a really good comparison for that. Saw where another YouTuber posted about finding small horsepower gains from indexing plugs and flipping pistons isn't the time waster that I'm thinking they were from watching your videos. I don't know who. Somebody else did a piston flipping actual back-to-back tests because I haven't ever seen one of those. David Vizard has talked about it, but I haven't seen the actual results of it. And after doing the test, I know that there was nothing there. But as always, you're welcome to go do the thing, whatever the thing that you think is going to work. That's neither one of those is where I would be looking for power because there's nothing there. I run 530 synthetic in my 5.3. It's got a high pressure, high volume pump. I run 1540 diesel synthetic in my flat tappets. 1040 standard. My 383 has a roller cam. I don't think that there are other refineries capable of making better. Is that a question or is it a statement? He didn't test. He just said tiny gains add up. See, that's always the thing. That's always the go back to. Well, there's got to be a little bit, and every little bit. That's what racers always say that do it. Well, we're looking for little bits, and every little bit adds up. No, it doesn't. 0 and 0 is still 0. Those don't add up to anything. VR1 2050 in high performance. I don't think I would do 2050 in an LS, but I don't remember testing the VR1 stuff. I told him time costs money. It's not free horsepower, even if it's 1 horsepower. That's the thing, and it's not. It wasn't even that. There's just like nothing there. It is, Alan. You're right. It is new math. And the thing is, I get in these discussions with people that have, oh, I've done it for 20 years. We know it works. Well, okay, then show me the data where it worked. Because there's nobody in this industry more than me that wants it to work more than I do. I want this like weird stuff that we test. It's a much better video if I find power. People will like the video a lot better. But not finding it also is also a good video. Just giving you guys the truth is what I should be concerned about, and it is. And doing that is a win. But if we found power, the video would be more successful. People would like that more. Oh, we found 100 horsepower from tying a shoelace from the left to the right rather than from the right to the left, or whatever the thing is. So I want it to be there. I really do. When I did the interview with Uncle Tony, I said, look, I want this piston flip thing. I want that to be a thing. I really, but the testing side of me is also like, one side's going, hey, Richard, yeah, that's cool. Let's do it. That's got to work. We got to make power. Yeah, that's awesome. That's like more power. And the other side's going, you have to test it. And so you have to do, you realize what that test is going to entail, right? It's going to entail making sure the thing is absolutely perfectly 100% repeatable down to the decimal point, which we did. And then it's going to require taking the whole motor apart and putting it back together and moving pistons from one side to the other and doing all that. And bless Freiberger and Dulcich for doing lots of that stuff. Well, I was obviously helping them do that too. But with 3 of us there, it was a lot easier to get everything done. And then doing it again and then getting it to repeat, like I said, to the decimal point of 1 horsepower. And that's nothing. You can't, a lot of guys can't get that repeatability without doing any change. It's really hard. I know, I've done this a lot. I had this conversation with Brule the other day. He's like, do you find that, if you want to, you do the normal things, like you stabilize air fuel, you stabilize timing, you stabilize water temperature, you stabilize the air temperature. The air temperature has a correction factor in the dyno anyways. You stabilize air temperature, and you stabilize oil temperature. But he said, do you also find, because this is like the next level for dyno guys, because we've been doing it a long time. It's like, do you find that the procedure that you do to achieve those also makes a difference? I said, dude, it totally does. If you sit there and let it idle to get the temperatures to stabilize, that's different than running the thing a few times and then letting it cool off and then doing the test and having it come down. So if it comes down versus it goes up, that makes it different. Even if the numbers are exactly the same, there's something that's going on. So obviously there's a temperature differential that's going on inside the motor that is not registered by the water and oil temperature that we're reading. There's something else in there that's changing that affects the power. But you wouldn't know that. Like 99.9% of the people in the world wouldn't know that unless you've been doing the dyno for a really, really long time and you've tried weird stuff and you recognize patterns. And unless you see that, you wouldn't ever see that. Let's see. Cryptocurrency. No, I'm not getting into that. Offset cranks are making power. An offset ground crank is a stroker motor. So yeah, that can make power because you've changed the displacement. Switched to 1030 from 530 and a 2.2 liter Dodge after raising boost, and it has more cold idle oil pressure. So yeah, going up to a 1030 from a 530. I've done that in my truck and it definitely changes the oil pressure. And it has more lifter tick. Can I let it warm up? Well, you should always let a motor warm up anyway. You shouldn't start it up, put it in gear, and mat it. That's not good for a motor. Richard Holdner versus Project Farm, and my name is not spelled correctly there, but I wouldn't go against Project Farm. I would like to do some with them. I love their stuff. I think they're awesome. They're real test people, and he's got cool rigs and stuff that are awesome. 1030 in my 86 Corvette, 90,000 blow by on the valve cover, gaskets won't seal. 1040, all is right. There is that discussion too. The lighter weight oils make the motor leak more because it's slippery and thinner. It gets past stuff. There, that's one of the things. I'm not going to put that synthetic stuff in my engine. It makes it leak. That means your engine leaks. Let's see. He said you didn't account for throttle response. He said it hits the converter harder. I said, well, if it hits the converter harder, we can measure that. We might not be able to measure it on the engine dyno. We can certainly measure it on the chassis dyno. So what he's doing is trying to make a statement that's not testable, so then he can say that he's right, and he's not. He's not a tech guy. Throttle response is another of their fallback arguments. Inline 4 motorcycles are offset the rod journal to overclock the power stroke. Lots of factory deals had offset pins in the piston. That's not uncommon at all. Longer rod, more power is busted too. I haven't. Freiberger and I both agree that we don't think that there's very much there on a longer rod. I've tested it on a small block Chevy and didn't get anything. Didn't see any power change at all. But I do want to retest it, because again, I want that to be something. I want to see something there, and there just wasn't the last time that I tested it. So I want to see if there is something. I just don't know how much it's going to be. Yeah, Project Farm that's good stuff. I've used header mounted PCVs. So like a Panavac system. On an air-restricted engine, a longer rod could add power significantly, but only in odd cases. So it's specific to what it wants? I don't know. I've quoted 5 of them. Did you quote 5 like tests where they did it back to back and changed only the rod length? Because I don't remember seeing that. Have you built any high horsepower 4AG 16 valves? No, I haven't built them. I do watch the 4AG channel though, and I thought that he did a rod ratio change or a rod length change, but I didn't get into dissecting what his actual change was, and he was doing it on a chassis dyno, which in my opinion is not repeatable at all. But I do like the 4AGs. They get a bunch of them come into West Tech because Eric does tuning for a bunch of them with, side draft stuff on them. I like I said, I want it to work. I want it to change power. I just don't think it will do what people have shown me or said that it does. So, Richard, on the question from earlier today, positive placement manifold PCV bubbler port. I called Roush directly. They confirmed it as a constant boost dump to the blower elbow as an oil drain. So they're oil draining and drawing the oil back into the inlet system? I don't think that's a good idea. But the guys at Roush are a lot smarter than me, so I wouldn't ever inject oil. That's why I wouldn't run a PCV into the inlet side of the system either, because I wouldn't inject oil vapor into a supercharge application because the flash point of oil vapor is much lower. It would be much easier to detonate that way. But if they designed it, they designed it. Just curious when you might see on the dyno you run lighter rods, pistons, and cranks. I don't see that making more power, but would make a difference in the proverbial throttle response. It actually does make a difference in power. And if it makes a difference in throttle response, it can be measured. And changing the reciprocating weight definitely changes power. We've already measured that. We can do that very easily. We don't have to change the rods and pistons and the crankshaft. We can do that very easily by changing the weight of the flywheel. Did Porsche buy the patent from Mitsubishi for the 8-valve motors like the GLH for the 944 inline four-cylinder? Or if you're talking about the 3-liter one with the balance shaft in it, they didn't buy the patent. They paid patent royalties to Mitsubishi for it. 2.5 tall deck has longer rods. Yeah, I've read up on the long rod motor that guys want to build, and the guys from the Car Farmer and I were talking about this. I would like to do one of those just to demonstrate what it does or doesn't do. The rod length is a big deal in the duration of the power circuit. A big deal? What about Beam's 3S GTE? Were you asking that of somebody besides me? Negative 10 degrees outside? That's not good. Don't race motors not use PCV, only breathers? Yeah, they run breathers. The PCV is vented to atmosphere. That's what we do on the dyno too. I don't ever draw that back in. Are ported LS3 LSA heads still running neck to neck with aftermarket castings? I didn't know that they ever were. There are definitely better aftermarket heads than a ported LS3 head. The problem with the ported LS3 heads is it already starts out with too much port volume, in my opinion. But you can make lots of power with a ported LS3 head. So that should be your question, like how much power am I trying to make? And will the ported LS3 head actually do that? No, specific to air restricted engines where CFM demand is high. The two examples are an A series Mini, the 4AGE Toyota, the 200, 221. So you think longer rods would help all of those? Is that what you're saying, Dean? So then it should help a 2.2 liter Dodge Turbo, or certainly a 2.5, right? I guess I just have to do another long rod test because people want that and people seem to be going nuts over it. So I definitely have to test that. I need to talk to the Car Farm guys and see if they have a tall deck block. The port is in its lowest port point in the manifold, no check valve or anything, wide open straight to the elbow and pushes any oil that accumulates from the blow by right back into the elbow. Yeah, I just don't see how that's a good idea. If the opening is really small, you're actually not going to lose much boost through that. I mean, we've had fairly good sized holes where you don't lose that much. Like we've had on turbo applications, we've had the 8 pipe fittings that we put in for everything nitrous deals or temperature probes, all that stuff. We had those. I've had even bigger ones than that, and it really doesn't lose that much boost. With a longer rod, the piston would have to have a higher pin placement, maybe allowing for a slightly lighter piston. Well, see, that's the other consideration in this connecting rod thing. If you're changing the rod length, almost by design, if you're going to make any sort of significant change in the rod length, you're going to have a different piston. So are you going to have a different piston weight? Are you going to have a different piston design? Could that be part of a change in power? There are things that people can point to. I don't know what the answer is, but there are things that people could point to that say, hey, look, it could be part of this. -7 degrees here with a wind chill at -18. That's a lot of wind chill. An engine running in a vacuum condition makes a measurable amount of power increase. Makes a measurable amount of power increase from what? Travis, if you talk to Brian Tooley, he'll also tell you that the LS3 has too big a valve too. You plan to test projected tip spark plug? Sent you pics of a really long tip that I came across. I didn't do projected tips. I did some tapered seat plugs versus gasketed plugs. So the tapered seat plug pushes the tip farther into the chamber than the gasketed one does, because the gasketed one tends to end pretty close to the end of the threaded section on the cylinder head. So you see what happens there. The answer really is, if you're looking for power in spark plugs, you should look somewhere else. Testing you do will help, with those 5 engine combos show the same changes on an engine dyno program and in practice. So you have actual back-to-back tests where you change the rod length. That's my question. It's a question. Do you have actual back-to-back dyno tests where they changed only the rod ratio, the rod length, with no other change, and it changed the power curve? That's my question. And if you have that, I would very much like to see it. It looks like Wasner would make the best piston for a GLH. Who's that? I've never heard of that name. What is the effect of having too much port volume in your experience, like the LS3? I think port volume has much more to do with part throttle drivability than it does with wide open throttle power. But we see that on the, and maybe this is a kind of an indication, although we've changed the cylinder head pretty dramatically. If you run a cathedral port versus a rectangular port head, the rectangular port head certainly makes less low speed power. It has a much, much bigger intake valve, and it has much more port volume. So you can attribute that to, but I need to go back and look and see. I did a test comparing the LS3 head to the 317 head. And when the chamber size was the same, I don't know that there was as much of a dramatic difference in low speed power between those two. Let's see. LS3 versus 317. So there's an LS3. It's a 317. So the LS3 head was better from 4,200, from 4,100 on up. but they were pretty close down low, actually. On the 799 head, the 799 head was definitely better below 4,000. But I think that probably part of that is or maybe even most of it, is the change in, because the head flow would be the same between a 317 and a 799. The chamber's better, not just smaller, it's better on the 799. But the 799 is smaller, so it would have more compression. So maybe that's where the extra low speed power came from. T165 is a big valve. For Cleveland head shouldn't work at all if the Ellis heads have too large of a port. Have you measured the port volume on a Cleveland head? It might not be that much bigger than a in terms of total volume. And really, the Cleveland head, the 4V Cleveland head, is big at the entry. I'll take port velocity versus port volume. So, freelance writer, you think a rod ratio change would change from the curve from making low end power to making top end power? We obviously definitely need to test that. Now the question is, how much of a change can we make without affecting something else dramatically? Because we have to keep the displacement has to stay the same, the compression has to stay the same, so the piston design has to stay the same. Also, it can't be a change in dome and or dish profile or quench. It can't have any of those things, which definitely can affect it. It can't have any ring change. And we're almost going to have to build two motors, which is kind of why I want to do a long rod. And then the weight. What if we change the weight of the rod? What if the longer rod weighs more? That could change power too. So that's what I mean. It's a lot of stuff. Chevy put short rods in the 400 to add low end torque. You think that's why they did that? It has to do with the thrust angle. I understand what happens when we change the rod length. We went through all of this when we did the offset piston thing. Is the pin height the same on a 400 piston as it is on a 350 piston? Is the compression height the same on those? Didn't Engine Masters do a test with two identical cubic inch engines with different rod lengths and piston heights? Pretty sure the power is identical. I thought that Freiberger tested that also, and we came to the same kind of conclusion that on the ones that we tested on, there really wasn't a change in power. People that are expecting some sort of big change, that's not going to happen with a rod length change. Jet Black. Yeah, I don't want the chamber volume. What I want is the port volume. My friend stuck 5.7 rods in a 400 with a stock 400 piston. Deck height was close to 0. How is that possible? Is the 5.65 rod pull the piston down in the hole? The longer rod's definitely going to change dwell time. But when we say stuff like that, when you do the math on it, you see what that change is. Like that's when we did the math on offsetting the pin. You see how like absolutely insignificant the changes are. There are changes, and so as soon as you tell somebody that there's a change, they go, "Oh, well, yeah, that explains it." No, it there's a change mathematically. There's a decimal point, and then there's a whole bunch of zeros, and then there's other numbers over here. And so that's how much it changes. And then that's amount of one kind of change, and then that change has to then translate into some kind of change in power. And it didn't do that. So I'm not saying that the rod length doesn't do that. I hope that there is a change, but I'm pretty sure it's not going to be very significant. Snatch up a tall deck Chevy, all the room you need for rod length tests. Garage 54 added a third compression ring on a piston. Check out the way Yamaha is offsetting the crank on their GP bikes. It's different than moving the pin as it doesn't lose the gains from friction. They're offsetting the crank though, and not the pin. 2 more minutes. On a 4-stroke LS with its short cylinders, could the long rod help skirt longevity? With that longer stroke and a longer rod, which most people would use a 6/125 rod, which is longer than factory already. If you go to an even longer rod, you start running out of room on the piston, because then the rod just comes up to TDC and you can't have that happen. There has to be room for the piston crown. And if you make it much longer, you're probably already going to intersect the oiling ring, which is done on lots of stuff like the Ford's 347 deals. I like Garage 54 too. They do really cool stuff. I have an LQ9 408 stroker that was NA build, but it does it have forged rods and forged pistons in it? That's really all you need. Nick's Garage loves Zero Deck. Zero Deck really is the way to go. A lot of LS stuff is out of the hole, so it's positive, but what about a 377? Yeah, you can do that with a big bore 400 block. That's what Westech has. They don't have a 400 block. They have a Dart SHP block, and theirs is a 372 because of the bore size, but that's what they have. They have a big bore, 4125 bore, and then they have the 350 crank in it. The 377 versus the 383 is a good example of what? Those are just a change in displacement. You'd need to equalize the displacement, because the one that has more displacement is going to make more power, regardless of what the rod ratio is. I don't think I've ever seen any 400 blocks in the wrecking yards, although I say that I probably haven't looked in great detail. I tend to look at the card because I'm not very looking for small block Chevys very often. When I do, normally the small block Chevys I would be looking for would be either something specific like a tune port motor or the Gen 2 LT1 base stuff, or the Vortec motor, which would be one that I would go to also. But looking for regular small blocks is not, that'd be pretty uncommon. So we're going to go ahead and close out our poll at 61%. So it's obvious I need to do a rod length test. I also need to do another peanut port big block Chevy head with the gentleman who does the Vortex stuff. I want to do something with him. Are you going to do another live stream before Christmas? Yeah, I'll do one tomorrow morning. Because I'll be trading in the morning, and then I do the live feed after that. A 383 Pontiac. Oh, from the 350. So I have the 350 Pontiac to test, which will be good. Yeah, if some of you guys don't show up, Merry Christmas to you guys, and make sure you're staying safe and making good choices out there. Richard, do you know if there's any difference in marine small block Chevys as opposed to plain Jane ones? Other than the marine ones getting better stuff sometimes, getting better camshafts and stuff. I don't know what else they do to marinize them. Which variable and how would you test things like stroke or kit wear on a long rod test? You wouldn't test wear, at least I wouldn't, because we wouldn't do a long-term deal. Super rare 2.5 HSR. Remember those tempos? Tempos, yeah. I was thinking Tempest. Marine small blocks run backwards and crank gears with no chain. All of them are like that? Don't you use a stock 400 short rod piston with a 6-inch rod and a 350 crank to get a 377? You don't need to have a 6-inch rod. You put a 350 crank in the 400 block with a 400 piston, right? 6-inch rod. Does that all line up? I don't know what the math is on that. The higher rod ratio doesn't affect power, but it does affect longevity. I would think it would. I mean, the theory is that if you reduce side loading, that it reduces wear, I guess. The long rod test that I could do would only be power, really, because that's the only thing that we can test on there. Can't test longevity. Thanks, Dean. I know you're just being nice because you had 5 examples of where long rods work, but that's okay. Advice for people who want to be a tuner: you just go out and learn it. Just go out and learn it and do it and try it. That's what I'm doing on trading. I'm learning. I'm in school. I think on dual engine marine setups, only one of them spins backwards. I know that they all don't spin backwards because I've worked on some in I think that they were in like Ski Nautiques or Chris Crafts or something like that. Some of those ski boats. 350 crank and a 400 block, a 5.7 350 rod. That's what I was thinking. It was a 5.7 rod, 400 piston. So is a 400 piston, is that the same pin height as a 350 piston? Obviously, it has to be if you're using a 5.7 rod and if you're using all the 350 stuff in the 400 block, but with the 400 piston. I have a 97 Silverado that's a V6. I'm debating on swapping a 5.7 small block or an LS. I plan on daily and lifting it probably. 400 wheel horsepower is going to be hard to get out of either one of those unless you do it with boost. You should dyno a backwards boat motor. We used to be able to run reverse rotation stuff on the dyno when at Westech, because I ran B series Honda stuff there, but that's when they had the old 901. The 902s won't do that. So the 400 piston is the same compression height as a 350. Okay. 5585. It's a 565, right? Or 556? I think it's a 556. $5,565, yeah. They pulled a boat out of a lake that had been there for 30 years and got the engine running. Nice. Was it underwater? An underwater engine build would be good. Not very becoming. And on that note, it is time to go. But I will be back in the morning-ish after we get the other stuff going on in the morning. And I have the videos I have to choose from now. I have, I don't think I have any more oiling videos. I have more spark plug stuff. And I also have, I'm doing one on, so let me know if you guys want to see one on temperature. So I ran it at, I think I ran it as low as 116 degrees. I think is as low as we got it. But we ran it from 116 in steps all the way up to 100 and it's way up here. You can't see my hand, up to 180 degrees. So you can see what the difference is between running very, very cold and then running in the range that we normally do, 130 or so. And then what happens when you run it up at 180 or 180, because I would think it got to be more than 180 during the pull. So you can see what the difference is in temperature there and see what the change in power is. Because one of the comments that we get in addition, oh, that's not real world. That's just dyno. That's not, that doesn't show us what really happens. But you can see what the change in power is from the different temperature. And it'll give you an idea on how much power you need to add or subtract when you're talking about the numbers. So it's good stuff. And on that note, I will see you all tomorrow.